Hey guys, welcome to the podcast. I just wanted to let you know before we get into the podcast, it was a fantastic interview with Mike Israetel. Unfortunately, the quality of sound on his side was not amazing due to being in a gym, but the content was too good not to share in future. We don't obviously want this to happen. We know this as a podcast is all about the sound quality. So we hope that you can bear with us this week. Cheers guys, and enjoy the episode. Hi guys, welcome to the Revive Stronger podcast. I'm your host as always, Steve Hall, and we are welcomed by Mike Israetel once again. We haven't had too much of a gap between our Q&A sessions, Mike, so it's quite nice.
Yeah, it's strange to speak to you more than once every few months nowadays. We're both so busy.
Yeah, it's good. And actually, I don't know if something of interest is funny to me because obviously we talked about effective reps on the podcast, and then very soon after that, Greg Nuckols released his
plagiarized my shit.
And a few people asked, but you also did a public Facebook post. But I don't know if there's anything after seeing Greg's kind of input there, anything you wanted to kind of say after our last chat, anything new that's come up. If not, then we can just refer people to your Facebook comment.
Yeah, I don't know if so much new has come up as there's a couple things Greg didn't mention, and not to his detriment, that could be also potential, maybe not critiques of the effective reps method, but sort of grounding factors to take this out of the sky-high greatest thing ever and put it sort of back to earth. One of them that comes to mind that I've considered and write about a little bit in the hypertrophy book that we're writing is that slower twitch fibers do grow. They grow considerably, and cross-sectional fiber type studies on bodybuilders have shown that all of their fibers are bigger. Furthermore, people imagine that the difference between fast and slow fibers to be massive, like fast fibers are 10 times bigger or something. It turns out that's not really that true. Turns out they're twice as big. Now there's more, motor units. The bigger motor units have more fibers attached to them, to the nervous system component, to the nerve. But that's a little bit illusory way to look at it if you're looking at how much muscle can they stimulate. So to make a long story short, if you take a look at the effective reps concept and say all hypertrophy starts at 5 reps or close to failure or closer, you're missing out a lot of muscle activity that, as Greg pointed out, does actually occur with the biggest motor units already, sub-maximum. That there is absolutely an increase in their activity and extension throughput through them as you get closer to failure, but that increase isn't from 0 to 100. That increase is probably from 20 to 30% to 40 to 60%, which is meaningful, but not the end of the world. It doesn't make all the difference, just some. And also, we have to consider that slower fibers are active probably the entire time. So, kind of to put this like this, loads over 30% 1RM, and for sure loads over 60% 1RM. As soon as you lift the first rep, there's a considerable amount of potentially hypertrophiable fibers that are absolutely being stimulated and will grow. Like when you think about it, when you lift your 30 RM, especially for upper body, and for legs, if it's your 30% 1RM plus your body mass, you are encountering loads through a range of motion you don't normally encounter that much volume day to day. Because we could say, like, well, that's just as light as day to day activity. I don't know, man. Like, I'll curl a milk jug, right? But I'm not curling a 10 kilo milk jug for 60 total reps per day. And so the fibers responsible for curling milk jugs are, of course, hypertrophied for normal life in their maximum size. Like if you go to space and you get into microgravity, they atrophy and you turn into a wrinkled up piece of shit, for sure. When you come back to normal gravity, you bulk up just back to your normal self. But that 30 to 60% 1RM range, not to failure, by the way, absolutely will result in some hypertrophy. And by the way, all the studies that they've done on R&R method and seeing it getting closer or further away makes a difference, which are the studies for effective reps, which, as Greg Nuckols eloquently showed, are not nearly as conclusive as you might think. But even the studies, and so this is a critique Greg didn't make, again, not to his detriment at all, because this shit was super, super awesome, as always. If you look into the studies that show that have the most effective reps, the groups that have the most effective reps, versus the ones that have fewer or very few effective reps, the groups that have the fewer effective reps still grow. They grow considerably. It's the effective reps groups just grow more. So when people say like all the hypertrophy occurs between rep 5 RIR and 0, that's just plainly false, right? So you could even, if you were thinking at a little bit more advanced level, we know for sure that 5 to 0 RIR is much more fatigue, right? Never mind stimulus to fatigue ratio, because it's a little bit complicated. I can speak to that later. It's much more fatiguing to train in that range, but you can potentially train in a range outside of 5 RIR, still get some hypertrophy with very little fatigue. So potentially you may have 3 sessions a week. Monday, Wednesday, Friday, let's say chest. First session is heavy, lots of effective reps, closer to failure. Second session is lighter, closer to failure, lots of effective reps, but also lots of other reps. And then the Friday session could, especially if you're more advanced and you have trouble with handling a ton of fatigue, the Friday session could be, you actually stop at 5 RIR for every single one. You're going to get very little fatigue out of a session like that, but you will get substantial, faster fiber growth. And the cool thing about those kinds of sessions is you can probably repeat them multiple times throughout the week with almost no detriment. And for 2 reasons. One, they cause very little fatigue, so the SRA curves are short. And 2, the slower fibers just recover faster anyway, right? So it's the slower fibers you're training and the ones that recover. So, it's very easy to get, and I think I spoke to Jacob Skepis about this. You start to think, okay, the biggest motor neurons are the ones that grow the most. And in your mind, they get translated to they're the only ones that grow. As in you say in your, okay, the 5 reps short of failure are the most effective reps, the most effective, also other effective reps. And then you say, okay, there are only effective reps are 5 hours. And you do a couple of those loops where a difference of 70-30, which definitely train more of the 70 than the 30, turns into a difference of 100 and 0. And then someone says, like, what RIR is that? Like, that's 4 RIR. They're like, you missed out on 4 effective reps. I'm like, stay calm. Yes, I did, but I'm missing out on a tiny fraction. And if I'm considering that throughout the week, using fatigue management properly, then there is absolutely something to be gotten from those not as effective reps.
Cool.
So, which is why when we look at like something like myo reps compared to conventional training, there's lots of what you would call lead-in reps, like 5 sets of 10 versus 10, 5, 5, 5, 5, 5. It's by no means clear that, the more effective reps one, even if you add another set of effective reps in there, it's not clear that causes more hypertrophy. And it could be that the sets of 10 actually cause a little bit more hypertrophy, even if you dip a little bit lower on the effective reps. So, it's one of those situations where I think, Greg sort of said this in the best way, that even if you look at the effective reps literature, it's not so clear that it's like this huge dominance. But I think it's a very important concept. It's a centrally important concept, but it says something like, hey, this is important. You should do most of your sets should get lots of effective reps. And if you're leaving a ton of effective reps on the table all the time, your training's not that great.
Mm-hmm.
But it's, all the other reps are effective too, just not as effective. And as soon as you start to see it like that, you get the proper balance of it.
Yeah, I really like that. And it's reminding me of, like, I don't know, you see builders or you see like tennis players, and tennis players have like that one jacked arm. You think of like Nadal. I don't know if I'm just anecdotally, like builders of like big traps because they're like lugging around all this stuff. And maybe that's like 30% of their 1RM. They're certainly not going to failure on that stuff, or maybe they're not even getting 5 reps from like a failure point, but they hypertrophy.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. That's not the most efficient way to hypertrophy.
No.
But from a stimulus to fatigue perspective, there's some nuance there. One interesting thing is that, I think we talked about this last time, reps, 2 RIR is probably what I would say the average best guess for the best stimulus to fatigue ratio.
Yes.
Anything north of 2 RIR is going to be really, really fatiguing, although more stimulative by a little bit, fatiguing by a lot of it. So if you look at, and again, this has been happening in the internet response to effective reps concept, if you do 2 RIR, people will say you're missing out on 2 effective reps. Like, yeah, that's on purpose, actually. I was recently involved in a discussion with a very nice gentleman about adding sets versus adding intensity or adding load. And he said that, sets add lots of fatigue, central nervous system fatigue, but they don't add that much more hypertrophy stimulus because you could just add reps and get closer to RIR within the same set. And I was like, it's not really clear to me that if you take a program that has 2 sets, both at 2 RIR, compared to a program that has 1 set, to absolute failure. Which one of those is more fatiguing? What do you think, Steve? If someone had to say, hey, listen, you want to minimize fatigue, you only have two options. 2 sets of 2 RIR on the squat or 1 set at failure. Which one do you take? Man, to be honest, with compound movements that require a lot of gusto, I'd take 2 squats, 2 sets of RIR for sure.
Yeah.
And then you actually ask another question. Which one causes more muscle growth? The hilarious thing is that probably the 2 RIR 2 sets cause more muscle growth, because when they compare how close to failure you get, how much more hypertrophy you get, the results is sort of unclear. Like 2 RIR versus 0 RIR, you can't really state from the literature that for sure 0 RIR is better. Like, I think theoretically it's better by a little bit, but 2 sets of 2 RIR, gee, that's, remember all the stuff about the number of hard sets, and that certainly qualifies as hard sets. Gee, that's starting to be a whole lot more stimulus there. And for the slower fiber types, way more, double the stimulus, we double the number of lead-in reps. So it's one of those situations where I think if you really abuse the effective reps concept, you're like, all right, we got to do, first set's got to be to failure, and the second set has to be with relatively short rest, so we get as many effective reps ratioed to as few as possible lead-in reps. And then you end up getting a situation where the training is abnormally fatiguing and not understimulative. And if you want to make it stimulative enough, it gets really crazy fatiguing because, 5 sets to failure. Well, this is not a workout you can repeat in 2 days. But 2 RIR, you can repeat every 72 hours, and all of a sudden you're jacked. So, again, one of those situations where the concept of using the RIR, and especially you and I talked about this last time, I don't want to be dead horse. The last thing I'll say, counting effective reps as just literally just arithmetically counting them, like, okay, this set had 3, this set had 4, this set's better. Like, it's just fucking work like that. It's just because we don't know from 5 RIR to 0 RIR how much effect each repetition has. First of all, we have a guess, but it's probably a bell curve. It's not a bell curve, it's an S curve, that it goes like that. And then, so like, some of the reps are much more hypertrophic than the others. And then, but that's relevant, but also what's relevant is fatigue. And the fatigue operates not an S curve, but an exponential, like this. So when you get the intersection of those 2 curves, it turns into a pretty complex relationship where, you can't simply, the reps are not additive linearly. You're not saying, well, 2 effective reps plus 2 here. It's no. It depends on which place they were in the RIR. Like the 2 reps you do from, 1 RIR, 0 RIR, those 2 reps, they don't add linearly to 5 and 4. That's not how you compare it at all. And people are doing that, as I think Eric Helms pointed out, people seek a simplicity sometimes in a like arithmetic approach to training. It's just not there. I remember debating this kind of terms. This is back in my before the arguing to convince years. I would, mostly for entertainment purposes, debate strict HIIT advocates, high intensity training. And I had a guy tell me, 1 set to failure is the only non-arbitrary way to train. Every other number of sets after that and or any number of reps far from failure is random, arbitrary, and thus logical. And I was like, you're pretending that there's a logical structure here that doesn't exist. Like, you're making up the answer, and you're saying anything that's not the answer is off. So it would be lovely, unbelievable, if effective reps could be scaled linearly. Oh my God, are you kidding me? Dude, you could fucking write an Excel spreadsheet that calculates the shit so goddamn fast. Fucking blank. You could rate every single workout ever done objectively on hypertrophic stimulus. It would be amazing. Unfortunately, I don't think training is that much more complex, but it's more complex.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess it's one of those things where, unfortunately, it's quite nuanced. And yes. I think if you were going to really simplify it, it's like your training's got to be hard. Like that really simplifies it, but people get really like stressed out with these things. It's kind of like if you're going in there and you're taking sets and they're very hard, like pretty damn hard, you're challenging your muscle, things are slowing down, then you're doing good work in terms of that totally. Set was effective and you've got some effective reps in there.
Totally. And if you're doing a set that's super fucking easy on all counts, you don't pretend you're growing much. But then again, like, I don't know who didn't know that. Yeah, I take that back. A lot of people don't. A lot of people would like to, it's the same science crowd, us, that, if you see a study that says, oh, you can train pretty easy and still get strong, they'd be like, oh, great. Oh, these idiots going to failure. It's funny, though, I will say, bodybuilders with their super failure training and their drop sets and their make the muscle feel the weight instead of the absolute weight, pre-exhaust, they won the effective reps argument. That's all for them. Like if you do pre-exhaust your quads locally with extensions, and then you go do squats. The squat now becomes more effective reps for the quads because it's less centrally limiting, more peripherally or locally limiting. I mean, like, that's some really good takeaway from effective reps. It's like, yeah, pre-exhaust is a thing. And there's still science-based folks who say pre-exhaust is stupid because of dumbass EMG studies. It's if the point of training is to just zap your EMG, zap your muscular neural activity as much as possible. It's not the point of training. So it's an interesting thing we take into account. Like, there can't be any religion with science. There's no mix there. It has to be like, what does the science say? Okay, that seems reasonable. What do the best athletes do? That's also got to be taken into account. Where's the reasonable intersection of those two things so we don't get caught off guard, completely ignoring the best people to ever walk the face of the earth as far as being jacked, and also that we're not doing things that they do which are completely scientifically literate and moronic, which they do plenty of. We just have to know enough science and know enough real world to fall between the two somewhere, and then we can be relatively assured that at least we're taking our best guess.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. And actually, I guess we had one question come in that was related to something you spoke about there by Callum Ruff, and he basically asked, and that's to do with 2-RAR being kind of the best stimulus to fatigue ratio in terms of reps in reserve. And his question was essentially, why would we ever train with any other reps in reserve if that provides the best stimulus to fatigue ratio? And so I'd love to hear your kind of response to that.
Yeah, because towards the end of a mesocycle, you're accumulating fatigue so much anyway that you're going to short out in 1 or 2 weeks. Like, your cumulative fatigue is rising and it's going to hit your MRV soon. So you might as well go closer to failure in order to get where you need to go. So because you can accumulate all that fatigue, no problem, and then you get a delayed supercompensation effect whereby you get more raw stimulus if you go closer to failure. And then what you end up doing is you drop that fatigue anyway, and then you get all the best of both worlds. For example, in the last week of training, imagine stopping all of your sets too short of failure. Someone could ask, this is honestly probably one of my best thought experiments to do, so imagine you're doing something in the gym you think is right, and someone asks you like the simplest question about it. If you don't have an answer, you probably have some thinking to do. So someone's like, hey, why are you stopping all your reps too short of failure? And you're like, stimulus to fatigue ratio, man. I want to accumulate too much fatigue, get as much stimulus as I can for it. They're like, why do you care about fatigue? You're like, because I got to train hard next week. They're like, no, you don't. You have a deload next week. They're like, fuck, you're right. And then they go, doesn't it make sense to just pour everything you have into training this week? And, within reason. And then you'd be good to go. And you're like, yep, it sure does. So then it's okay to go much closer to failure. What I would say, though, is this. If it's like week 2 or week 1 of a 4 to 6 week progression, and you're going like 1 RIR, 0 RIR, you're just not thinking ahead. Like, are you getting more absolute stimulus? Yeah, totally. Per set, for sure. What does that do to the next week and the next week and the next week? Nothing great. And I also have an answer for the opposite question, just in case that wasn't asked. If 2 RIR is the optimal, so to speak, higher best SFR, what about 3 or 4 RIR? Why would you ever do that? Well, that's because the time you spend in a mesocycle, the longer you spend in a mesocycle, the more hypertrophy you get, the better your the accumulation to deload ratio. And a lot of times you can get really, really good stimuli when you do, when you're new to exercises. 3 or 4 RIR is a really good amount of stimulus for you. And it might actually have your best stimulus to fatigue ratio at 3 or 4 RIR because of the novelty of the exercise. But as the exercise becomes less novel, you have to milk it out to get a better stimulus. And also, because the exercise isn't as novel anymore, its fatigue component isn't as high. Because, if you do a set of leg extensions, you haven't done leg extensions in 6 months, that's a lot of fatigue because you're really highly damaged because your motor units are not used to those angles and forces and things like that, so you get a ton of damage. So there's a way in which 3 or 4 RIR at the beginning of meso actually is close to optimal. It allows to lead into a really productive mesocycle, whereby you get a lot of great 2 RIR training, used to the exercises and everything, sort of this kind of building momentum. So basically, you can start a mesocycle at 3 or 4 RIR because you don't need to go any harder, and you want to keep fatigue super low so you can set yourself up for as much awesome training in the middle of the mesocycle. And you end a mesocycle with 0 or 1 RIR because there's no point in holding back because you're going to deload anyway. And then the middle of the mesocycle is, roughly 2 RIR or so, where you get your best stimulus to fatigue ratio But unfortunately, because of the overload principle, you can't maintain there forever because cumulative fatigue starts rising. So
nice. Yeah, really well answered. I think you explained that better than I did. I kind of had a back and forth with him, and I was like, I'll ask and see how similar this is to me. But I was basically along the lines of, when you are going to the 1 or 0 reps in reserve, that's typically combined with MRV. So you can't add sets, because that was kind of his idea, was why can't you just add more sets of 2 reps in reserve? But there gets to a point, which is your MRV, where you can't just keep adding. So you might as well combine it with pushing all the way to 1 or 0 RAR.
Totally. I will also say that there may be adaptations in parts of the muscle that you can hit with 0 RIR and 1 RIR, which you can't get with 2 RIR. There might be a difficulty of training component independent of other components where pushing to the limits, for example, may lead to more acquisition of myonuclear domain space by satellite cell activation incorporation. You might not actually be able to activate maximum satellite cell pools with 2 RIR. So the stimulus to fatigue ratio is really good. There's a certain amount of raw stimulus magnitude, like, that you just can never reach. And thus, you always getting your quote unquote best gains relative to the fatigue, but doing even more sets of 2 RIR might end up plateauing your ability to gain. And going 0 RIR, 1 RIR might get you these new gains, but they're very expensive gains, right? But they're not, possible to get potentially with 2 RIR training. So that really over-the-top, really maximal stimulus is something you might seek, every, once a mesocycle or so, and it might be worth your while, because at that point, there's something, just more sets of 2 RIR is just out of their reach. It's like, what's the analogy? Climbing trees to get to the moon? Yeah, you can go higher, and climbing trees sure as hell doesn't cost you a lot of energy. Relative to the energy you expend, you get pretty high, because you just eat calories, climb trees, and it's easy. There's no rocket fuel, which costs like $1 million a fucking rocket or whatever, and it's horribly inefficient, but only a rocket can get you to the moon. You can't climb your way to the moon. So 2 RIR may be an awesome way to train most of the time, but there may be some really, really extreme adaptations, which we all need to be our best, that it just can never reach. And anyone who's ever trained to failure or 1 to failure knows that the kind of disruption you can feel locally is there's not a number of 2 RIR sets that get you there. So I think there's something to be potentially said for that. Though if you make the discovery that you never actually have to go to failure, fuck man, I'll be the first person on that.
Cool. Awesome. We'll get to the next question, which is from Brett Freeman. And he has asked, do you have examples of where the research doesn't support the outcome, but anecdotally seems true?
Jesus. Yeah, sure. Training frequency and hypertrophy. The biggest people in the world train most major muscle groups once a week. Some of them twice a week, although that is, I guess, the vast minority. Almost no one trains it 3 times a week that is any bit of jacked. And the research says that the more your training frequency is, the higher training frequency is per week, asymptotically. 2's a lot better than 1, 3's a little better than 2, 4 maybe a little bit better than 3, but still some detection there, and then 5 is sort of a wash, but maybe for small recovering, fast recovery muscle groups even better than 4, so on and so forth. That's what the research says, that all those are better, and the high frequency is better. But when you look at people who are the most jacked, they actually do the complete opposite of that. How can we explain this? There's a very distinct possibility that the culture of lifting that we have is so prone to leaving it all in the gym, like going really close to failure, multiple sets, 15 to 20 sets per session per muscle. You actually can't do workouts like that with high frequency. It doesn't work. So guys will sort of assume this is the case. This is what a training session looks like. Tons of sets to failure and 15 to 20 on shifts. And then they'll say, okay, insofar as this is a unit of training, a session, what is the optimal number of the sessions I can fit into the week? And the answer is 1. Because if you try to fit 2, you just overreach in a week and a half, and you're like, well, and you hear bigger guys say, like, yeah, I tried high-frequency training, but I couldn't recover. And they're like, what does that mean to you? And they're like, well, like 30 total sets of biceps a week. They're like, oh, Jesus Christ, of course you can do that in 2 sessions. So then maybe that artifact is that the assumption, that base assumption, may be erroneous, and then they carry it forward, and thus they discover that they can't do it. What's that called in mathematics? A local optimum. You basically have, like, the highest mountain ever is just over this peak, and you're just in front of another little smaller mountain, and you climb up to the top of the little small mountain. Wow, this is as good as it gets. Like, maybe you should climb down the other hill and go back up. Like, nah, I'm at the top. So, maybe that's the case. Maybe the case is that even with relatively normal training frequency, or relatively normal volumes, 5 to 10, maybe 8 to 12 sets per session, larger athletes that, remember, when you and I squat, we have a certain amount of central nervous system disruption from that. So it requires a certain amount of central nervous system output, a certain amount of axial fatigue, a certain amount of cardiovascular fatigue, etc. A certain amount of cytokines released in the bloodstream from essentially screaming muscles. When somebody like, Rolly Winkler works out, I'm going to say double or triple that shit. If you and I had to do his workout, we would actually just die. But he might be, like, pretty close to dead. Like, today I was squatting after doing leg presses, and I had to lay down for 5 minutes after squats. I've never seen anyone who weighs 120 pounds have to lay down after squats. But some of those people don't lay down after marathon runs, where I was simply dying. So it might be a thing that while the stimulus component of training scales relatively linearly with how big you are, the fatigue component scales exponentially.
Nice.
So that when you get people who are recreationally trained who weigh 65 kilos to squat 3, 4, 5 times a week, they can do it. If you get people who weigh 120 kilos to do that, and they know how to squat, they may simply be unsustainable for them. Now, maybe, so that's, I think both are happening. If I had to guess, I'm not so interested in guessing about these things, so we honestly just don't know. But if I had to, like, put money on it, actually, I'm in Las Vegas and I don't gamble. How fucking Jewish is that? So, I don't gamble, but if I had to, I would say both are happening. That's my best guess. I would say people, yes, they train with too much volume per session. Yes, they train too close to failure, etc. If they stop doing that shit, they could do more sessions. Do I think that means that Rolly Winkler could train chest 6 times a week? No. I just don't think that's the case. Instead of training once a week, could he train it twice? Yeah, I think so. I think some of the guys may be able to train the smaller muscle groups 3 times, biceps, rear delts, so on and so forth. But I think at the top level of acting pros, their disruption of the muscles is so insane, their systemic fatigue is so insane, that I think it really comes down to maybe 2 to 4 times per week would be the highest training frequencies those folks can sustain. I don't honestly think, it's not my best bet that folks like that could survive, like, everyday training. I just don't think that's really likely.
Cool. Yeah, I was even surprised when I saw that you were upping your training frequencies to like 3, 4, and even considering like almost daily, because you are stronger than every listener we probably have, or maybe I'm not crediting the listener audience enough, but you're pretty damn strong. So to see that, I mean, obviously you're doing it very calculated, and it's not something you've done yet. So we'll see if you survive.
I did quads today. Yeah, well, so I did quads today, right? It's my current split is 3 quad sessions per week, right? My session for quads is 6 sets. No, I take that back. It's microcycle 1, 5 sets of quads, 3 sets of leg presses or pendulum squats, same shit, and 2 sets of squats. I was fucked up. Like, most people in bodybuilding wouldn't even consider that, like, that's like the first exercise you do 5 sets, right? So when you say that, like, even like this, he's really big, he does such high frequency. For me, 3 times a week for quads is a lot, and I have to do much smaller chunks. And eventually, I'll work up to 6 to 8 sets per workout, but like that's it. For hamstrings, 5 sets average per session, 3 times a week, is the most I can do without getting just consistent overlapping DOMs all the time. If you said I had to do 6 sets of hamstrings 3 times a week, I'd be like, yeah, no, I'm just going to rip my hamstrings are going to come apart. So Jared Feather, much more fast twitch dominant than me. He doesn't do well at all with back, chest, quads, or hams 3-session workouts. He actually can't do it. I think 2 is his limit. It's not difficult to imagine someone twice Jared's size, just as fast twitch, and most of the people twice Jared's size are very fast twitch. It doesn't strain credulity to think that those folks 1.5 times per week is the most. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, that's not. So, and also I will say, like, I can't sustain these frequencies indefinitely. I have to do it for a couple mesos and then back off. And again, special sports supplements are a thing.
Yeah.
Train with such high frequencies, I take more special sports supplements because otherwise I would fucking fall apart like Mr. Potato. So that's definitely a constraining factor for sure.
Cool. Awesome. Actually, one question I had that I don't know if it doesn't really relate to anything we've said, but it's a question I have had come up now and then, and I've never actually got it out on the podcast, and I haven't really heard it talked about much, but I think it relates to the thermic effect of food and the different macros, and that it's kind of, as far as I'm concerned, and I think a lot of the listeners are concerned, they think of it as common knowledge that protein has the highest thermic effect of feeding, like 25%. And then people will then talk about how, say you had 100 calories of protein, you only actually absorb like 75% of those. And I remember I'd heard, I think twice it's come up on RP Plus now, where you and James have gone back and forth and been like, they take this into consideration when they tell you it's 4 calories. But that doesn't seem to be common knowledge within even in the evidence-based field. So I'd love to hear you kind of talk to that.
To quote Donald Trump, wrong. Wrong.
Oh dear, he got a quote on the podcast.
How far I've seen quoting Donald Trump. So my understanding is that thermic effects averages are taken into account when we publish the calories. So when I was an undergraduate, we learned that depending on the amino acid, the unadjusted calorie effect is so protein. When they do like a bomb calorimeter, right? When they just blow food up and see how much they burn it and see how much calorie comes out, it's actually like 5.7, 5.8 calories per gram of protein. And then you're like, what the fuck? And for carbs, it's like 4 point something. And for fats, it's like 9 point something. But because fats and carbs have really low thermic effects, it just goes down to 4 and 9. And protein has a big thermic effect, so it goes all the way from 5 point something, which is a way far from 4, goes all the way down to 4. The thermic effect of protein, as far as I know, that I could be mistaken, but I doubt it, is already taken into consideration with that 4 calories. So I think it's great news because you don't have to do any extra math.
Yeah. Bad
news is you've been eating double the protein. You're like, it's cool, it's burned off.
Yeah. Which is what is like the common is like, oh, I'm on a diet, but I'm hungry. I'll just increase my protein because that will have the smallest impact and it doesn't have as many calories. So, whereas in reality, it would be lovely that was the case. But like you said, it seems like it's already taken into account. Cool. So we had actually, I thought this was a very interesting question from Brett Freeman again. He said how to transition from volume landmark approach to a more static set volume due to time constraints.
Train closer to failure than normal, progress with weights and thus RIRs, and get ready to deload a bit more often. And that's it. So, if you can scale volume, you could start a 4 RIR. If you can't scale volume, you might as well start a 2 or 3 RIR at the beginning of the meso. And because if someone can say, be optimal if you just did another set and didn't go as close to failure, you'd be like, that's nice, motherfucker, I don't have time for another set. And then if you don't, say, okay, what's the best way to get still a lot of stimulus? Like, you almost have to think of it this way. We have a certain amount of time to spend in the gym. Now it's not a lot. How hard are we going to train while we're in there? Pretty hard. Harder than normal. Another way to think of it is this. We have very limited time to add a ton of fatigue, right? Thus, we're not going to add as much fatigue. Thus, we can have approaches that don't have as good of a stimulus to fatigue ratio because we need just more raw stimulus. which is one of the things we'll be introducing in the book, term raw stimulus magnitude. It's like how much muscle growth does this cause per rep per set? Who cares about fatigue? In a sense, you have to care less about fatigue when you have constrained gym time, because look, you're not going to hit your MRV. It's just not going to happen. So how are you get close enough to hitting your MRV is moving closer to failure, and progressing in intensity steadily so that you continue to get closer and closer to failure. And thus, was it Brett Freeman that asked the SFR question as well, the 2IR? Or was that something
No, that was someone else.
Oh, be interesting if it was the same person. But yeah, so that's sort of the deal is like, yeah, the 2IR is optimal, within constraints, of course, and some nuance, if you have all day to be at the gym, but you don't. So now you're also seeing, like, how much fatigue can I generate with only an hour in the gym? Nothing that concerns you as much. So then I need more bang for my buck. Okay, sweet. Well, there you go. Get closer to failure, and you'll have to progress. You'll probably have to make more intensity jumps, because you won't accumulate much fatigue between the weeks, which is cool because you can make bigger intensity jumps because the fatigue from more sets isn't in the way. Does that mean you'll get better, as good of results? No, because intensity progressions are inferior to volume progressions in all likelihood for hypertrophy. Better for strength, which is just sweet. But it does a good job of mitigating what's not there. What would be erroneous is to make no adjustments. Can you imagine, like, you're like 3 or 4 RIR and you're taking like long rest breaks, and someone's like, so when do you need to leave the gym? They're like, oh, it's been 15 minutes. And like, shouldn't you like work harder? You're like, no, I want to manage fatigue. Manage it for what? You're only in the gym 4 hours a week. You're like, that's a good point. So that would be my answer. Go close to failure from the start, and allow yourself to auto-regulate RIR stability or RIR jumps week to week to week. And if that auto-regulation is good, if you do a good job of it, the result will be increase more weight on the bar faster week to week.
Cool. Yeah, I don't know if some people might even find it where, I think I've had it with clients where we've started out at minimum effective volume, 3 to 4 reps in reserve, and they are recovered enough to add more, but they don't have sufficient time. So we've kind of capped their sets, like their MRV for time is up. So then just capping sets and then progress. You can only progress via reps or set or intensity and RER drops. So it kind of works itself out, I guess. If you've got a time limit, you've got a time limit.
100%. 100%. You just have to do your best within the time allotted.
Cool. Next question is from Benjamin Turgeon. He has said, "Hi, Dr. Mike. What are your thoughts on maximum muscular potential for naturals such as Casey Butt's equation? Should we take them as hard limits, or are they too imprecise?"
Casey Butt is a funny name. No love lost. I just think it's great. It's cool to look at and fun to look at. All based on averages. There's a very big leeway between individuals, even taking that into account. What I think those equations can do is make people sane when they're pretty jacked and they think they're not, and you just run them through the equation. You're like, dude, you're like 5 pounds off the biggest this equation would ever predict you get. And they're like, oh, I thought it was a useless piece of shit. Like, no, you're fucking awesome. You know, there's a ton of people using gear, especially in the United Kingdom where the shit is legal, right? And, you go into a gym, like, well, I'm at City Athletic right now. I'm like maybe halfway to the biggest person here. And like most normal gyms, I'm like looked at as a fucking monster. And now I'm like, oh my God, I don't even lift. You can imagine somebody who's natural walking into this place and be like, fuck, what am I even doing? Well, you're on nothing, and everyone here is on, like, it's just like literally like a dead horse somewhere they've extracted all the hormones from. Every day they kill a new horse, right? So, it's really easy to lose track of that. So those equations can be relatively calming. On the other hand, those equations are not a guarantee that you will get that muscular. Genetics for muscle building, maximum muscular potential, not everyone can reach. You'll get that muscular if you have really good genetics. If you have exceptional genetics and you really know what you're doing, you'll get better than those equations by some small to moderate margin. But a lot of us will never even touch those equation predictions because we're natural, and we also just don't have the greatest genetics for bodybuilding. Which, as a public service announcement, is 100% okay, and here's why. Bill Gates, what's his bodybuilding genetics? I believe the correct answer is who gives a shit? Certainly not him, right? How good of a person are you? Doesn't matter. I know a ton of jacked people who are scum of the earth. I wouldn't leave my wallet out in front of them. They're my friends, right? So it's not a big deal at all. But if you look at these natty equations and you think, I've got to get here, but you just never had the genetics to be able to hit it to begin with, it could be really disappointing in the same way that it could be enlightening if you do have the genetics. So, it's like anything with an average. You may do everything you can to get there and never get there. Or you may be able to train for 2 or 3 years and surpass it. So I think it's cool to look at those numbers and sort of be like, oh, this is interesting. Especially cool to look at it after a couple of years of training. What you don't want to do is look at it and be like, okay, this is my goal. Like, I don't know if it's not really a goal, because your genetics play such a huge role and your lifestyle, et cetera, such a huge role. So I think they're interesting to know. Again, one of the uses for them that's not a good idea is the client asks you, like, how muscular can I get? If you give them the output of those equations, if they have good genetics, they'll be pleasantly surprised. If they have average/good genetics, they'll be right on target. If they have below average genetics, which a lot of people do, precisely half of us have below average genetics, by the way, that's how statistics work, they will be perennially and potentially crushing you. So I think a lot of people look at those equations in those two ways. You get sort of the same kind of incels look at those two equations. One incel just got to his equation, and he looks at everyone who's bigger, and they're like, not natty for sure on drugs, which is wrong. And then the other kind of incel who has shitty genetics looks at it and is like, just develops a deep hatred for himself and everything around him because he's not even close to being anywhere near him. So interesting, can be perspective giving, but fundamentally, you do your thing, you eat, you train, you sleep as best you can, and then you find out how big you can get. There's no other way around it, because the equation can give you a real rough average, but it's not going to give you a precise number. I'll tell you, here's how it can be useful. Let's say you're a certain height, certain bone width, so on and so forth. And you start out weighing 120 pounds. And you ask me, I wonder how big I can get naturally. It's going to give you the answer. The proper way to read it is probably like somewhere between 160 and 200, right? That doesn't mean you make 200 your goal. That also doesn't mean you make 160 your goal. But you could say, like, yeah, it's very likely that I'll make 160. Let's see, I just eat and train, and that's sort of going to be my expectation. If I make 160, I'll be pretty happy. I'll allow myself to be pretty happy. And then once you get to 160, after 5 years, you can be pleasantly surprised that you continue on, and eventually you get to your biggest at 170, and you're like, wow, this is awesome. What it can inoculate you from these equations is wild unrealism, which I think is, as soon as people start looking, if you're the kind of person that's intelligent enough to look at an equation for your answers, you're probably more intelligent than this kind of person, which I'm about to describe, is someone who sees like Flex Lewis at 212 and be like, that's my goal. Like, Steve, I was going to say you have no idea, but you have every idea. How many people there are on the internet that think that their realistic future is Mr. Olympia? I mean, it's fucking insane. There's like 12 people ever that have been Mr. Olympia. These people are like, I'm going to do it. Like, it's nice to think that, I guess. But it can be really good to look at the equation and be like, you know what, let me just try to get here first, the low end of it, see where I go. And you may be pleasantly surprised. Like when, back when I was natural, back when I was natural, I exceeded all those equations. I actually have relatively small bone structure. I'm not very tall. And I had a rough semblance of abs at 210 pounds body weight at 5'6", which was pretty fucking sweet. So I was over the average, but like I never saw those equations. I just trained for like 6 years really hard and ate pretty well, and ta-da. So seeing it, I'm sure as hell isn't going to help you in any way physiologically. It's not going to change how you plan your training at all. But it can give you, like, again, like just to reiterate this long rant, the most important point, is look at the range, take the bottom end. That's a fine, rough goal to give yourself. And if you're above that goal, great. So that's awesome. And if you have aspirations, because, these substances are legal in the United Kingdom, I can't actually say this on this podcast. If you desperately want to be 200 pounds lean, and that's your life goal for whatever fucking reason, and you find out the equation tops you out at 180 pounds, you know that you should get at least 160 to 180. If you do that for a couple more years to make sure you're really milked it out, let's say you get to 177, and then you get like a pound of muscle in the next year, then it's time to take the plunge, because you are not going to get to 200 drug-free. It's just not going to happen, right? At least those equations can sort of help you do that. But I will say you don't actually need those equations for that, because you can see the asymptotic rate of gains anyway at some point. But maybe you could think like, but if the asymptote, maybe if my eating is wrong, maybe my sleep is wrong, maybe if I find the right way to train, it could just go back like up like this, which can happen with some things. But if you look at those equations, it's like, look, you're at the top end or the middle end of the shit already. Like, if you really have this goal to get where you need to go, it's going to take extra help. So that could be a cool thing.
Fantastic. Yeah, I really like your point on do your best job and you'll get what you get. And this is why I think like the emphasis on just actually enjoying the process is just so important, because so many people give up because they don't enjoy it and they have false expectations, and then they don't get anywhere near to where they could potentially even get.
Well, I'll tell you what, man. I don't really know. There's a couple of reasons to train to get more jacked outside of enjoyment of the process. And enjoyment of the process occupies probably 80% of the happiness that you'll get out of that. The rest of the 20% is all 20 other factors combined. I'm trying to think in my life what it is being jacked has gotten me other than enjoyment. People in elevators say things like, oh my God, like, you're really big. You may like that sort of thing. I'll tell you, it doesn't get old. It gets monotonous after about a year of hearing it. You're like, yeah, I've heard that before. If you're trying to do it to get laid, it doesn't work. Work on being lean, being a nice person, and go look up like Mystery Method and the rules of the game, lifestyle.
Nice person, Mike. Never be nice. You know the bad guys always get the girls. Poor advice.
Yeah, did I say be nice? Yeah, don't necessarily be nice, but be confident. And anyway, look into the psychology of pickup, because it's actually a very well-studied area. It's not very controversial. It works.
I read one of those books.
Yeah.
When I was young.
There you
I
go.
couldn't do any of the tips. I was like, I'm way too shy.
I'm not a scumbag yet. But even, there's other ways to play it. Like, so for example, like, even if you're super shy, like if you brag and you don't even believe yourself, it's just a bad look. So even if you're not outgoing, you can take a lot of those tips and mold them to how you sort of conduct yourself. In other words, even if you're shy, right? Like, let's say a girl that you like texts you. If you immediately text her back, you're kind of a chump. Don't do that, right? You don't have to be shy or not shy. You just not do dumb shit, right? If people say shit like follow your heart, like don't follow your heart. If you want to get laid, don't follow your heart. It just lies to you all the time. If you want to find the girl of your dreams, follow your heart. That's nice. But if you just want to get laid, don't do that. Then again, your muscles have very little to do with that. I'm pretty sure my being jacked has never gotten me laid. My being jacked had never even had anything to do with me finding the girl of my dreams. My wife, Crystal, legitimately, no joke, I'm pretty sure she's okay with me saying this. I'll like just be gnarly, ripped and big, and I'll be like, honey, check this out. And she'd be like, that's nice, baby, and just walk off. I'm like, what the fuck? But she legitimately, if I was any other size or shape, she just wouldn't care. I'm like, really? How the hell does that work, So it won't get you there. I don't know what else is it going to get you. I don't know, maybe if you like intimidating other people, just take Muay Thai and Jiu-Jitsu for 10 years. Then you won't have to intimidate anyone, because you'll know that you can fuck people up as soon as shit hits the fan. Yeah, I don't know what else. Like, what else is there other than, like, to me, 80% of enjoyment at least is like noticing that you're hitting little mini PRs, feeling the mind-muscle connection on exercise, pulling your shirt off after workout, and seeing your lats, just be like, like, the Rolly Winkler, the Kuwait oxygen magic mirror, that the mirror they have that they take pictures in. That's the core of bodybuilding right there. Like, I don't even give a fuck about the Mr. Olympia. I'm a Rolly Winkler fan because that magic mirror exists. Because those pictures are like, what is that? Like, every one of us has our own little magic mirror, even if it's in your own head or if it's a shitty bathroom mirror. That's where all the love is. That's where all the magic is. If you don't like that part, fucking Christ, just pick something else. lift weights 2 to 3 times a week to be in good shape, and go ride motorcycles or something, become a pickup artist, get a real job and a career and a loving family. That stuff's way better than bodybuilding for any other purpose than love the sport. So 100%, Steve.
Cool. Actually, that leads into another question, and that was from, let me just find the name, because I've remembered the question, but not the name. So it's from Omar, and he asked, how would you train to optimize health? Because you kind of touched on health there, and I think a lot of the listeners might think that maximizing hypertrophy is still coincides with maximizing health, but I think it doesn't necessarily. So I'd love to hear your kind of comments on that, Mike.
Yeah. So to maximize health, I would lose a lot of weight. I would say that you need to find a body mass index that's in the low end of the healthy statistical range and stay there. If I was to be optimally healthy myself, I'm 5'6", I would weigh between 120 and 150 pounds. Wow. Yeah, sure. Yeah, my resting heart rate would be like 5 beats per minute. So, first of all, lose a lot of weight. Second of all, train 2 to 4 times a week with mostly compound heavy basics, full range of motion, and train in various rep ranges, mostly the strength and hypertrophy range. Really, 5 to 20 reps is totally fine. Do a pretty decent amount of cardiovascular activity, because that's very, very health promoting, and eat a very healthy overall balanced diet. Get lots of sleep. Don't stress out too much. And there you go. There's health. So, the more muscle you add on top of that, if you still do all of those things and add muscle, that's cool. But it reduces your longevity to some extent. Probably not your quality of life during the time that you're alive, but it will reduce your longevity, which is, health span, so to speak. So it's, you can still do the core of your hypertrophy training, but just getting much bigger than your average size without training is probably, you could have been doing more cardiovascular work and getting way more health benefit. Even drug-free lifters that gain, when you are in a hypercaloric state, it is deleterious to your health if you start at a normal body weight. If you start at a subnormal body weight, hypercaloric condition saves your ass. Like you get an anorexic in a hospital, hypercaloric is way healthier than anything else. But if you're already of a normal body weight, which means statistically normal, which is really light, any hypercaloric fronts, any pushes into hypercaloric, every hour of hypercaloric activity is a blood lipid profile, blood glucose profile. That is not optimal for your health. It's just not. To put this in perspective, there's a drug called metformin, which lowers your blood glucose level at any given time. It's now had enough research about it where it's pretty competent to say that it's actually a life extension drug. It literally just makes you live longer. It makes animals live longer, humans. Probably one of the best ways it does this is it just lowers the amount of sugar you have in your blood. Because when you ask yourself the question, what the hell am I doing eating 650 grams of carbs a day? You're degrading your lifespan. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Is it by much? No. Is it, stay away from cocaine and alcohol? Is that good? Yes, totally. Stay away from anabolic steroids and getting to 280. Yeah, super good idea. I say this as sitting at 240 on my way up, hilariously. But yeah, if you're 200 or 180 jacked and relatively lean, you're like, I'm totally healthy. That's completely true. But if you ask me to say, what could I do to be healthier? Training wouldn't change a whole lot. I would say do more cardiovascular training, less weight training. More of a 50-50, 70-30 split, more cardiovascular, less weight training. But lose weight. And if you get lighter, like if you, Steve, weighed like 160 or something like that, your resting blood pressure and heart rate and stuff would be like baffling. You're like, oh my God, like I'm hypotensive, I stand up and pass out. Your heart beats once every 2 seconds or some shit like that. Okay, like, wow, like you go to the doctor and he's like, well, it's the healthiest person I ever seen here. So it's one of those things that it really, it's maybe underappreciated. In our field, definitely underappreciated because BMI doesn't mean anything. Yeah, it sure as hell does. Mm-hmm. But I'm jacked and BMI tells me I'm fat. It's wrong about that, but it is telling you that you're bigger than average, which is good that it's muscle and not fat, which makes a difference, but it doesn't make all the difference, just some of it.
I remember Broderick saying, I think when he came over and did his UK seminar, he said like one of the biggest health concerns that steroids end up bringing is just you're so big, and that in itself is a big problem. So yeah, that made me like it just kicked me up the arse, and I was like, okay, actually, yeah, I understand this better now. That makes good sense.
Yeah, totally.
Cool. Time for one more question.
One more. Let's do
One more. Cool. So Andrew actually asked, he asked about muscle loss when prepping on anabolics. Kind of asked about percentage of body weight loss per week. Can you go faster when you're on anabolics? Because obviously you've got that support there versus a natural. Does it change the game?
Yeah, you can get away with more. I will tell you this, in order to get away with faster losses per week in anabolics, you have to take more anabolics to make sure that you don't lose muscle. More anabolics drive your hunger up higher, and they improve feed efficiency even more, which means you have to eat even less food. They also reduce thyroid production, which means you start to eat even less food, and then you become very fucking hungry, very low energy, and super fucking miserable. Dieting on anabolics, especially if you're rushing, is way harder psychologically than dieting drug-free. The results are cooler if you can survive, but also it throws off your body water like crazy. So what I would say is that anabolics, it's actually better to diet slower and simultaneously gain muscle while losing fat, or diet slower but you were leaner to begin with, because anabolics allow you to walk around leaner and not have, oh no, your hormones are off. Who gives a shit? Your hormones are all exogenous anyway. So someone on anabolics could diet for 12 weeks but get to start at 10% body fat as opposed to somebody's naturally starting at 12 to 13 and needs to diet for 20 weeks or something like that. So I think the best approach to anabolics is dieting, maybe not slower, but just at the same normal clip. But you get to eat more food, your workouts are better, you don't hold as much body water, you just freak out psychologically, all is well. So if you give me a person who needs to be in contest shape in 6 weeks and someone says you can either use anabolics or not, what are you going to do? For sure use it. But then I would also put that person on a shitload of thyroid hormones, a shitload of DMP, and all of a sudden their life is absolutely no fun at all. Well, yeah, they get lean. There's Victor Martinez had some pics like multiple years, 5 years ago, longer. He was like, he looked like he was 60 weeks out and was like 5 weeks away from showtime. And then he showed up to the show, like qualified for the Olympia, like second or third. And they're like, how the fuck did you do that? He's like, I had to do some things that are not really a good idea. Which means probably like a shitload of fat burgers. Your heart's like all the time. That's the real shit that kills you, right? Like over time for sure. So, can you use anabolics to diet faster? Yes. Is that a good face value idea? Absolutely not. I think Broderick would probably say almost the identical.
Fantastic. I don't know if you have time for what I have remembered a question I was going to ask related to the health question. It was just regarding kind of cardiovascular work. I know it's something that I see come up in terms of doing maybe some cardio in your off season as a bodybuilder. Obviously, we probably do it when we're dieting for contest, but in like an off season or just someone who's generally trying to be kind of as jacked as possible, they're trying to maximize muscle growth. So typically just a bodybuilder, but they also, do we need to do some cardio for health as well? Or is that going to take away from maximizing?
No. Yeah, I think there's a middle ground there where it actually boosts some health pretty well. Not optimally, of course, way more cardio to do that, but also keeps you a little bit leaner and gets nutrient partitioning going a little bit, maybe even reduces some stress. So what I would say is 2 to 4 times a week on your off season, go for a 45-minute walk outside, or even just go on the treadmill and listen to a podcast. Nothing too crazy. Get a little bit of a sweat going. Don't even get your breathing super heavy. It'll keep you leaner. It'll keep you healthier, and you'll feel better. And your training will go better because you won't have as many lower back cramps. And fat guy tired from the squat as opposed to muscle tired. You're like, I'm just too fat. This is awful. It's less of that. So that's really cool. You do much more cardio, and that's going to start to crush your muscle gains. But up to 2 to 4 sessions of 45 minutes a week of cardio, and you can split that up as much as you want. Walking outside, walking the dogs, playing some fun games. That's just really good for your health and probably optimizes muscle growth, or at least doesn't detract from it, and makes you feel way better too. You could end your mesocycle at 5 pounds less than you would have, but with just as much muscle and 5 pounds less fat. Which means that when you start prep, it's way easier. So I don't think people should quit cardio completely. Just do much less.
Yeah. And as a really quick example, or as a thought process, could someone just, if they didn't want to do formal cardio, could they just not be sedentary, make sure they get a decent step count in? Would that satisfy that criteria?
That's actually by far the best.
Right.
For the purpose of that example, I was assuming that they already have a step count that seems sufficient. But a good way to increase step count is during you take a walk, right? Or like instead of like maybe you want to go to like an M&S to get a couple of snacks for after workout.
Chicken
There's
and
one that's really
sweet corn.
close. That's right. Of course, you're welcome. By the way, I can't believe I introduced you to shit in your own country. So basically, there's one that's like a block away, and there's one that's 4 or 5 blocks away. That's a nice day outside. Go for a walk. Go to the farther one. Go increase your step count. All be well. If you're super fucking lazy on a mass phase, just get ready to get super fat, and then mesocycle 3, your training is going to be awful because you're going to be too fat to recover between sets. You're going to have no rest time and all this.
Great. Thank you very much, Mike. Thank you for the Q&A, taking the time. I'm sure the listeners absolutely loved it. I don't know if there's anything you want to plug or tell anything people about. I'm not sure if you.
When does this go up?
This will probably go out. This should go out this month, so maybe even next week.
Oh, soon or already, probably soon. The RenaissancePeriodization.com website is going to have revamped individual muscle guides for hypertrophy.
Oh yes,
fucking unbelievable. Each one is roughly 15 pages, about 7,000 words each. And there's 14 of them. We're going to release one a week, starting in probably late September, early October, and going through till January. And they're going to be amazing, super revamped, way more shit. It's going to be really good stuff. So look for me to post that on social media at some point, or go to Renaissance and Google that. It's super awesome.
I saw the sample, it looked really good. So yeah, definitely keep your eyes out for that, guys. So thank you very much again, Mike. Thank you guys for listening, and we'll catch you soon.